our winning author for a session with Dr. Mridula Sharma on her book Eden Abandoned. Shiny Antony is a writer and editor based in Bangalore. Her books include The Girl Who Couldn't Love and Barefoot and Pregnant. She has compiled the anthologies Hell Hath No Fury, Boo, Why We Don't Talk, and Unsuitable Woman, and co edited The Art of Holding On, Letting Go. She won the Commonwealth Asia Region Short Story Prize for A Dog's Death in 2002. Her novella, Can't, was longlisted for Crossword Book Prize 2024. She is the founder of the Bangalore Literature Festival and director of the Bangalore Poetry Festival. Erudite scholar, author, and head of the Department of English at MCM DAV College, Chandigarh. I would like to welcome both of the ladies on stage. I hand over the stage to Mridula and Shiny for what promises to be a very interesting session.
Thank you so much. I hope I'm audible. Hello. So, good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Wise Owl team and especially Dr. Rachna Singh, the founding editor and a dear friend, for giving me the proud privilege to be in a conversation with Shiny Antony, the celebrated, prolific writer and a bold voice in the world of letters today. Her book, Eden Abandoned, The Story of Lilith, is the toast of today's evening, as it has been for the readers ever since it was published last year. I extend a hearty welcome, ma'am, to you and congratulate you on such a riveting piece of writing. Please accept my wishes on winning the Wise Owl Literary Award for your book in the category of fiction. Can we have a round of applause for her, please? Now, talking about the book, Lilith, as I gather, is a character from Jewish folklore, believed to be the first wife of Adam before Eve came on the scene. Created by God just after Adam, with the same material, smaller than him in size. Am I audible? Smaller in size than him, but every bit his equal, or so she thinks. And that is where the problem begins. Lilith demands equality, Adam rejects it, cracks get wider, the marriage crumbles, and Eden breaks loose. Lilith abandons Eden. Adam constructs a convenient narrative about her departure. God, being a male, believes it. Who knows if it wasn't his idea in Adam's head in the first place? The heavenly forces collude in criticism. Scriptures go silent on her, and Lilith is cast out of the haloed circle, out of the comfort of her parental lap. She quickly earns the tag of a divorcee and a drunk and becomes the consort of demons, the nocturnal, the malevolent, the lustful, the revengeful, the eater of babies, the antithesis of a good wife and mother. She simmers, rages, rants, and erupts with the fury of a volcano, but only at what she calls the wintry fringes of existence. Shiny Antony centers this Lilith in her book. Lilith speaks, and how? Her words fall like rain, gentle and invigorating when she's in love and loved back. Beyond that, her words are little flame bombs, unexpected, uninhibited, searing, and powerful. Passion, anger, dejection, grief, all drawn out of the fire in her heart, blazon themselves on the mind of the reader. It is impossible to keep down the book once you have met Lilith and Shiny behind her. You want to hear it all, especially because it is meant for you. Lilith contextualizes it for you, the modern reader. She brings in the references to Broadway productions, tourism brochures, plastic surgeons, and therapists, all part of your milieu. So, may I still ask you, Shiny, why Lilith?
Thank you so much, and thank you to Ramendra, to Navjot, and Santosh for everything that you said and for everything that you read out. So your question is why Lilith? I feel in every human being's life, there's a moment where you come to a complete betrayal that you're totally alone in life. Your family, your society, nobody, your kid, your kin, your lover, your children, nobody is with you. And that actually is our real journey into ourselves when we feel we are absolutely alone. And I could identify with Lilith in this book. It's God, the Father, who completely lets go of her hand. And I think that for me was a defining moment because I could identify with it. For most of us, that is when we start relying on ourselves and we ask ourselves the larger question of I'm not anybody's daughter or wife or mother or friend. I am who? And that is one existential question I think all of us come to at some point in life, and hence Lilith.
So, Lilith, as was mentioned when the jury were here on stage, that Lilith lives within all of us and probably the gender doesn't matter. In the recent few years, there has been a breaking away from tradition in terms of retelling of the myth, reinventing the epic, or reorganizing the characters, placing the marginalized characters in the center, and fracturing the points of view, the established points of view. Would you say that Eden Abandoned belongs to that tradition or is part of that tradition?
I do feel that in India, when you talk about mythology and stories, they do not belong so much to the minorities. They belong to the Indian. They're the Indian stories. But for the religions that came from the outside, our stories originate outside India. So it's very difficult to find some material or find some identification with these stories. And I was brought up by an atheist father. So for me to go back to a story that echoed when I was growing up and to find that character and give it a tongue, I think was very interesting.
So, as far as I gather, the character of Lilith does not exist in Bible per se. Genesis book 1 mentions the creation of a woman alongside Adam, just the way that you mention it. And Genesis 2 then talks about a woman being created out of the rib of Adam. But the character of Lilith exists in popular imagination, so to say.
All these stories are written by men. Therefore, women who did not conform or did not look like what they wanted women to look like, they got written out of the stories. And bad women, so-called bad women, have 2 points in common. They are unfaithful, flamboyantly, continuously unfaithful, and they are bad mothers. So these two narratives really don't suit a man.
I think the concept of motherhood and womanhood has been summed up in the paragraph almost towards the end of the book, on, if I remember right, on page 126. So, would you like to say something about it? Because this woman is, like you said, not not even a mother, and a very different kind of a woman who is far away from the imagination of a male writer, so to say.
I think for Lilith, she felt, this is my reading of Lilith, she felt that when she killed newborns or babies up till a certain period of time, she was freeing the woman to go out and do her own stuff, to find herself. Because a lot of what we do in life, all our creative energy goes up in being whom we think we should be, because from the time we are born, there's a certain way that we are. And for her, motherhood, when she's taking the babies away, it's basically freeing those women into being who they want to be. The thing is that she eats babies, right, in this book, and she enjoys the little crunch and munch of those cartilage bones. She just enjoys. And she is the patron demoness of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, where you don't know why babies die. So earlier, when they really did not have any medical word for that, it used to be said that it was Lilith who came to take away the babies, because that's what bad women do. Which is why the word lullaby has come into use. It basically means Lilith, bye-bye.
So from the character now, I would like to move on to the language, and I would like to wax eloquent to a certain extent, because language is a very, very crucial part of your narrative, the way you choose to use the words. So there is, of course, the power of the image, or the freshness of the simile, or the novelty of a metaphor. I mean, while reading, I paused to enjoy the beauty of Lilith saying, "I'm a bolt of silk in a breeze, smooth and soft." That bolt of silk continues to flutter in slow motion in my mind ever since. Then there is the pithiness of words. I am a memory erased even as I live. Or curiosity was never a virtue in the wrong gender. Then there is the undercurrent of experience, collective and personal probably, in phrases like trusting and lusting with innocent lunacy. Or that men in love make a toy out of you. But my question really is about that openness of expression, the hard-hittingness, the rawness of it. Words aren't used to camouflage or to gloss over any details. There's no hiding behind a symbol. And your attitude towards language reminds me of what Mahashweta Devi has once said, that language is a weapon. It is not for shaving your armpits. So what would you like to say about the choice of language that you made?
I think I wanted to convey her anger, and anger was best conveyed in that way. You know how it is that the anger of men is very much celebrated. It is almost foreplay. When they are aggressive, we clap, we applaud. We always want to meet a man who has the macho attributes to protect us, the little women, But a woman's anger is always considered, an angry woman is considered an oxymoron, because we are always being told how to speak softly and how to laugh into your own mouth. Yeah. We cannot make any noise, and the more we are noiseless, the more we are appreciated. So what happens is, as you age, you find that other women who are aging are not, as you earlier thought, thinking about what to make for breakfast or what are my children doing right now. No, they have very extremely cruel, extremely passionate thoughts, sometimes of homicide, of anything basically. So I think the angry young man that we celebrated earlier, it is now the angry old woman. And an angry woman who's articulate is a work of art.
So, if I may ask whether you felt any pressure in that area, whether while you were choosing your language, were you making any compromises along the way ever, or you wrote what came to your mind, the way you wanted to write?
I think I pretty much wrote the way I wanted to write. And I had a beautiful, beautiful editor, an extremely young girl actually called Abhivyakti Singh at Hachette, who got me completely. You know, at no step of the way, if I told her, maybe gently, she said, you know, she, of course, was after me to make the story longer because, you know, I'm a short story writer at heart and I don't want to repeat myself. So I would keep making them short. And then she would say, no, 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 that's all in your head. You've not really written it down. Right. But apart from that, if she gently suggested something and I pushed back, she would immediately understand. And I feel she got Lilith in the first reading. Like I sent this manuscript to Hachette and within a week they had accepted it. And it was like a complete acceptance, except for they said, could you by chance make it longer? But they had no other issues with anything.
Actually, my question, I should have made it clearer. You know, when women writers write, there is a book by Ammu Joseph, it's called Storylines. It it has experiences of women writers across different regions of India. And writer after writer, though it's a slightly older edition, writer after writer talks about the compromises that she has had to make, or the backlash that she has had to face in case she writes something explicitly. Some of the writers even talked about the mother figure looming large over their minds, telling them to be decent, telling them to be graceful in what they wrote. Sometimes families would be singled out and children would make fun of them, and the mother writers would be called names and all of that. So those pressures, the writers in that particular book, they say that those pressures were from them. So I was asking about those pressures because you just mentioned that we are supposed to laugh, but in a whisper probably. So in that sense.
I think aging is the answer. You just have to keep aging because aging is a superpower. Being single is a superpower. Not having children is a superpower. And you can do what you want if these three things are. If you can keep aging, I think that's the primary requirement.
That's very, very, very interesting. So I have been given the signal to wind up. Yes, this is what I was about to ask. That it would be nice.
I'm so happy that Ramendra gave me a paragraph to read because he asked me, aren't you going to read? And I said, read what? Like, I haven't really prepared anything. And he said, I will tell you. And then this is a part that he has chosen. The world belongs to them, good men, bad men, every man, all men. Slightly behind them, their smiles slightly stiff, stand the good women. Goodness is a cage the good never rattle. Bad women are not even part of the ecosystem, relegated as they are to the outskirts, never to be spoken of. Tarts and temptresses, strumpets and sirens, courtesans and concubines. Cold run eyes and smudged lipstick, gin on their breath. Women without men, that's a leper colony. Moses only parted water, man parts women. On one side of him stand the moral women, and on the other, the immoral ones, shameless, unclothed, unwashed ringlets, falling loose on their clavicles. If you don't have a husband, you are everybody's wife.
So if I can ask one small question before we end. In the end of the book, Adam dies and Lilith lives. How is it significant?
Because Adam is mortal and I'm not his PRO.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure talking to you and such an honor. Thank you.